The yellow bulldozer roared like an angry lion. Its metal teeth bit into the fresh concrete, tearing it apart like paper. Dust flew everywhere. Workers screamed and ran in all directions. 72-year-old Harold Mitchell sat in the driver's seat, his wrinkled hands steady on the controls. His white hair blew in the wind. His blue eyes were sharp and focused. "Stop! You can't do this!" shouted a man in a fancy suit. This was Gerald Patterson, the president of the Homeowners Association. His face was red with anger. His expensive tie flapped in the dusty wind. Harold didn't stop. He pushed the lever forward. The bulldozer crushed through a half-built wall. Bricks tumbled down like falling dominoes. "This is my land," Harold yelled over the engine's roar. "You had no right to build here." Behind him, 3 police cars pulled up with their lights flashing. Officers jumped out, not sure what to do. Was this an old man gone crazy? Or was something else going on? Gerald pulled out his phone. "I'm calling my lawyer. You'll pay for every brick." Harold finally stopped the bulldozer. He climbed down slowly, his old knees creaking. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a piece of paper. It was yellow with age, but the words on it were clear. "This," Harold said, holding up the document, "is the original deed to my property. Your fancy new community center? It's sitting on land my grandfather bought in 1923. Gerald's face went pale. The police officers moved closer to look at the paper. What nobody knew yet was that this single moment would change everything. It would expose secrets that had been buried for decades. It would reveal lies that powerful people had told. And it would show everyone what happens when you mess with the wrong old man. But how did we get here? What could make a kind, gentle grandfather climb onto a bulldozer and destroy a building? To understand that, we need to go back 3 months. Back to the day when Harold Mitchell's peaceful life was turned upside down. Before we continue, where are you watching from today? Drop your location in the comments below. If you're enjoying this story, please hit that like button, share this video with your friends and family, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss what happens next. Now, let me tell you how this whole thing started. Harold Mitchell had lived in the same house for 45 years. It was a simple white house with blue shutters and a red door. His wife Betty had picked those colors before she passed away 5 years ago. Harold kept them the same because they reminded him of her smile. The house sat on 3 acres of land in a town called Maplewood. When Harold first moved there, the area was mostly farms and open fields. His nearest neighbor was half a mile away. He could sit on his porch at night and see a million stars. But things changed over the years. Developers came. They bought up the farms. They built big fancy houses with 3-car garages and swimming pools. They called the new neighborhood Maplewood Estates. Harold's little white house was now surrounded by mansions. His property stuck out like a dandelion in a rose garden. Some of his new neighbors didn't like that. The Homeowners Association was formed 15 years ago. Harold never joined. His land was here before their rules existed. He didn't need anyone telling him how tall his grass could be, or what color his mailbox had to be. For the most part, they left him alone. Sure, he got nasty letters sometimes. They complained about his old truck in the driveway. They said his vegetable garden was an eyesore. They didn't like that he fed the birds and squirrels. Harold ignored these letters. He had a right to live his life. His property was his own. But 3 months ago, something changed. It started on a quiet Tuesday morning. Harold was sitting on his porch, drinking his coffee. He liked to watch the sunrise. It was something he and Betty used to do together. A black car pulled up to his driveway. It was long and shiny, the kind of car that cost more than most people make in a year. A man got out. He wore a gray suit and carried a leather briefcase. "Mr. Mitchell?" the man called out. Harold set down his coffee cup. "That's me. Can I help you?" The man walked up the porch steps. He didn't smile. He handed Harold a business card. "I'm Richard Crane. I represent the Maplewood Estates Homeowners Association. May I have a moment of your time?" Harold looked at the card. Fancy gold letters. A law firm address. This wasn't going to be a friendly visit. "I suppose so," Harold said. "But I'm not joining your club, if that's what you're here for." Richard Crane sat down without being invited. He opened his briefcase and pulled out a thick folder. "Mr. Mitchell, I'm not here to ask you to join. I'm here to inform you of some changes that will be happening in the neighborhood." Harold raised an eyebrow. "Changes?" "Yes. The HOA has purchased a large section of land adjacent to the community. We're building a new recreation center. It will have a pool, tennis courts, and a meeting hall." Harold shrugged. "Good for you. What's that got to do with me?" Richard Crane smiled, but it wasn't a nice smile. It was the kind of smile a snake might give a mouse. "The recreation center will be built very close to your property. There will be construction noise for several months. We wanted to give you fair warning." Harold nodded slowly. "I appreciate that. Construction is part of life. I can handle some noise." "There's one more thing," Richard said. He pulled out a map from his folder. According to our surveys, a small portion of the recreation center will actually extend onto your property. Harold sat up straight. Excuse me? Just a tiny piece, maybe half an acre. The HOA is prepared to offer you fair compensation, of course. Harold's heart started beating faster. Half an acre? That was the section where Betty's memorial garden grew. The roses she had planted 30 years ago. The bench where Harold sat to talk to her every evening. That land is not for sale, Harold said firmly. Richard Crane's fake smile got wider. Mr. Mitchell, I think you should consider our offer carefully. We're prepared to give you $20,000. That's very generous. Harold stood up. His old bones creaked, but his voice was strong. I said no. That land belonged to my grandfather, then my father, then me. It's not for sale at any price. Richard Crane stood up too. He put his papers back in his briefcase. I see. Well, I hope you'll reconsider. The HOA has ways of making things difficult for people who don't cooperate. Is that a threat? Harold asked. Just friendly advice, Richard said. He walked down the porch steps. You have a nice day, Mr. Mitchell. Harold watched the black car drive away. His hands were shaking. Not from fear, from anger. He walked inside and went to his filing cabinet. It was old and rusty, just like him. He opened the bottom drawer and pulled out a metal box. Inside were all his important papers. The deed to his land was right on top. His grandfather had bought this land 100 years ago. 3 acres, clearly marked with boundaries. Harold knew every inch of that property. He spread the deed on his kitchen table. Then he got out a magnifying glass. His eyes weren't as good as they used to be. The boundaries were clear. The measurements were exact. There was no way anyone could build on his land without his permission, but something worried Harold. Richard Crane had seemed too confident, too sure of himself. Like he knew something Harold didn't. That night, Harold couldn't sleep. He kept thinking about Betty's garden, about her roses, about the promise he made to her before she died. I'll take care of our home, he had told her. I'll protect it, always. He wasn't going to break that promise. Not for $20,000. Not for $20 million. The next morning, Harold decided to take a walk. He wanted to see exactly where this recreation center was going to be built. He put on his boots and grabbed his walking stick. It was the same stick his father had carved 50 years ago. The wood was smooth, from years of use. Harold walked to the edge of his property. There was an old fence there, rusty and falling apart. Beyond it was what used to be the Johnson farm. The HOA had bought it 2 years ago, but something was wrong. Harold stopped and stared. His heart nearly stopped too. The old fence was gone. In its place was a bright orange construction fence, and it wasn't where the old fence had been. It was at least 50 feet further onto Harold's land. Behind the orange fence, Harold could see fresh dirt. Someone had already started digging, on his property. Harold's face turned red. His hands gripped his walking stick so tight his knuckles went white. They had already started building. Without his permission, without even waiting for his answer, and that's when Harold noticed something else. Something that made his blood turn to ice. The digging was happening right where Betty's garden used to be. The roses were gone. The bench was gone. Torn up and thrown away like garbage. Harold fell to his knees. Tears rolled down his wrinkled cheeks. 40 years of memories, destroyed in a single day. But as he knelt there in the dirt, something changed inside him. The sadness turned to something else. Something harder. Something stronger. They had made a terrible mistake. They had hurt an old man who had nothing left to lose. And they were about to find out what happens when you destroy the one thing a person loves most in this world. Harold knelt in the dirt for a long time. The morning sun climbed higher in the sky. Birds sang in the trees, not knowing that anything was wrong. The world kept moving, even though Harold's world had just shattered into a million pieces. Finally, he stood up. His knees ached, his back hurt, but his mind was clear, clearer than it had been in years. He walked along the orange construction fence, studying every detail. The fence stretched for about 200 feet. All of it was on his land. He could see the marks where the old fence posts used to be. They were now 20 feet behind the new fence. Someone had moved his property line. Someone had stolen his land. Harold took out his phone. It was an old flip phone, not one of those fancy smartphones. His granddaughter Emily had tried to teach him how to use a new one. But Harold liked simple things. Simple things worked. He took pictures of everything. The orange fence, the dig site, the empty space where Betty's garden used to be. He even found one of her roses, crushed and dying in a pile of dirt. He picked it up gently and put it in his pocket. Then Harold walked home. He had work to do. The first thing he did was call his old friend, Tom Bradley. Tom had been a surveyor for 40 years before he retired. If anyone could help Harold figure out what was going on, It was Tom. Harold. Tom's cheerful voice came through the phone. Haven't heard from you in months. How are you doing? Not good, Tom. I need your help. Harold explained everything. The visit from the lawyer. The construction fence. Betty's garden. Tom was quiet for a moment. That doesn't sound right at all. Property lines don't just move on their own. Someone had to file new paperwork. Can you come take a look? Harold asked. I'll be there tomorrow morning, Tom said. Don't worry, old friend. We'll figure this out. Harold thanked him and hung up. But he couldn't just sit and wait. He needed to know more. He got in his old truck and drove to the county recorder's office. It was a small building downtown, squeezed between a coffee shop and a hardware store. Harold had been there many times over the years to pay his property taxes. The woman behind the counter was named Martha. She had worked there for as long as Harold could remember. Her hair was gray now, and she wore thick glasses, but her smile was still warm. Harold Mitchell, it's been a while. What brings you in today? I need to look at some property records, Martha. Something strange is going on with my land. Martha's smile faded. Strange how? Harold explained about the construction fence and the missing property line. Martha frowned. That is strange. Let me pull up your records. She typed on her computer for a few minutes. Her frown got deeper. Harold, when did you say this construction started? I'm not sure exactly. I noticed it this morning. But it could have been going on for a few days. Martha turned her computer screen so Harold could see it. According to our records, there was a boundary adjustment filed 6 months ago. It shows that you sold half an acre to the Maplewood Estates HOA. Harold's jaw dropped. That's impossible. I never sold anything. Martha held up her hand. I believe you. But look here. She pointed at the screen. There's a signature. It says, Harold J. Mitchell. Harold leaned closer. The signature on the screen did look like his handwriting, but he knew he had never signed that document. He had never even seen it before. Someone forged my signature, Harold said quietly. Someone stole my land. Martha looked worried. This is serious, Harold. You need to talk to a lawyer. Harold nodded. His mind was racing. Who would do this? How did they get his signature? And how was he going to prove that he never signed that paper? He thanked Martha and walked outside. The afternoon sun was hot, but Harold felt cold inside. Someone had cheated him. Someone had lied. And they had destroyed Betty's garden to do it. Harold sat in his truck for a long time, thinking. He didn't have much money. He lived on his Social Security check and a small pension from his years working at the post office. Lawyers were expensive. Fighting the HOA in court could cost thousands of dollars. But then he remembered something. His granddaughter Emily was in law school. She was only in her second year, but she was smart as a whip. Maybe she could help him figure out what to do. Harold drove home and called Emily. She answered on the first ring. Grandpa, I was just thinking about you. How are you? I've been better, sweetheart. I need some advice. Harold told Emily everything. She listened without interrupting. When he finished, she was quiet for a moment. Grandpa, this sounds like fraud. Forging someone's signature on a legal document is a crime. I know it is. But how do I prove I didn't sign it? Emily thought about it. The document would have been notarized. That means someone witnessed your signature. Do you know any notaries? Did anyone come to your house asking you to sign papers? Harold tried to remember. 6 months ago, a lot had happened. He had been sick with the flu for 2 weeks. His neighbor had brought him soup and checked on him every day. Wait. His neighbor. Emily, I just remembered something. About 6 months ago, a young man came to my door. He said he was from the county, doing some kind of census. He had a clipboard with a bunch of papers. He asked me to sign something to confirm my address. Did you read what you were signing? Harold felt his face get hot with embarrassment. No. I was sick. I just wanted to go back to bed. I signed it, and he left. Emily let out a long breath. Grandpa, I think that's how they got your signature. They tricked you into signing a property transfer document. Harold felt sick to his stomach. He had been fooled. A sick old man, tricked by a young con artist. What do I do now? He asked. We fight back, Emily said. Her voice was strong and determined. I'm coming home this weekend. We're going to gather evidence and build a case. Don't talk to anyone from the HOA until I get there, and don't do anything crazy, okay? Harold promised he wouldn't. But as he hung up the phone, he wasn't sure he could keep that promise. The next morning, Tom Bradley arrived at 8 o'clock sharp. He brought his old surveying equipment and a thermos of coffee. Let's see what we're dealing with, Tom said. The two old men walked to the edge of Harold's property. Tom set up his equipment and started taking measurements. He worked slowly and carefully, writing down numbers in a little notebook. After 2 hours, Tom had finished. His face was grim. Harold, I've got good news and bad news. Give me the bad news first. The bad news is that someone definitely moved your property markers. The original iron pins that marked your boundaries are gone. They've been replaced with new ones that are about 50 feet closer to your house. Harold's heart sank. And the good news? Tom smiled for the first time. The good news is that they made a mistake. A big one. He opened his notebook and showed Harold a diagram. See, when your grandfather bought this land, he had it surveyed by a very careful man. That surveyor did something smart. He didn't just use iron pins to mark the boundaries. He also referenced permanent landmarks. Harold looked at the diagram. I don't understand. Tom pointed to a spot on the map. There's an old oak tree on the corner of your property. It's mentioned in the original deed. The surveyor measured the exact distance from that tree to each corner of your land. Harold's eyes widened. He knew that tree. It was huge and ancient, at least 200 years old. It had been there long before his grandfather was born. The tree is still there, Harold said. Exactly. And when I measure from that tree, your property extends exactly where your grandfather said it did. The new markers are wrong. The original deed is right. Harold felt a spark of hope. So I can prove that the land is mine? You can prove it beyond any doubt, Tom said. Whoever moved those markers didn't know about the tree reference. They thought they could just pull up the old pins and put in new ones. But the deed doesn't lie. Harold shook Tom's hand firmly. Thank you, old friend. You don't know what this means to me. Tom patted Harold's shoulder. I knew your grandfather. He was a good man. He would be proud of you for fighting this. After Tom left, Harold felt better than he had in days. He had proof, real proof. Now he just needed to figure out how to use it. He spent the rest of the day going through his old papers. He found letters from his grandfather, yellowed and fragile with age. He found old photographs of the farm as it used to be. And he found something else, something that made him stop and stare. It was a letter from the county, dated 30 years ago. The letter was about a proposed road that would have cut through Harold's property. Harold remembered this. He had refused to sell the land for the road, and the county had eventually built the road somewhere else. But that wasn't what caught Harold's attention. What caught his attention was the name at the bottom of the letter, Gerald Patterson. 30 years ago, Gerald Patterson had worked for the county planning department. He had been the one trying to buy Harold's land for the road, and now, Gerald Patterson was the president of the Maplewood Estates HOA. This wasn't random. This was personal. Gerald had been trying to take Harold's land for 30 years, and now, he had finally found a way to do it. Harold's hands trembled as he held the old letter. The anger he felt was like nothing he had experienced before. This man had waited decades for his revenge. He had forged documents. He had hired con artists to trick a sick old man. He had destroyed Betty's garden. For what? For a recreation center? For a swimming pool? No, Harold understood now. This wasn't about the recreation center. This was about winning. Gerald Patterson couldn't stand that a simple postman had beaten him 30 years ago. He couldn't accept that Harold had said no. Well, Harold was going to say no again. And this time, he was going to make sure Gerald never forgot it. That night, Harold sat on his porch and watched the stars. He thought about Betty. He thought about his grandfather. He thought about all the people who had lived on this land and loved it. I won't let them win, he whispered to the night sky. I promise. The next few days passed slowly. Harold stayed away from the construction site. He didn't want anyone to know what he was planning. Emily arrived on Friday afternoon. She looked tired from the long drive, but her eyes were bright and determined. I've been doing research, she said, spreading papers across Harold's kitchen table. Grandpa, what they did is definitely illegal. Forging a property transfer document is a felony, and moving survey markers is also against the law. So we can go to the police? Harold asked. Emily hesitated. We could, but here's the problem. The HOA has a lot of money. They have powerful lawyers. If we go to the police, they might claim it was just a mistake, a clerical error. They could drag this out for years in court. Harold's hope started to fade. So there's nothing we can do? I didn't say that. Emily smiled. I have an idea. It's a little risky, but I think it might work. She pulled out a piece of paper. According to state law, if someone builds on your property without permission, you have the right to remove that construction. You just have to give them written notice first. Harold's eyes narrowed. Remove the construction? You mean tear it down? Exactly. If we can prove that the land is yours, and if we give them proper notice, you have every legal right to demolish whatever they've built. Harold thought about this. The idea was appealing, very appealing. But won't they fight back? Sue me? Emily nodded. They might try. But here's the thing, Grandpa. If we're right about the fraud, they won't want this to go to court, because if it goes to court, everything will come out. The forged documents, the moved markers, the con artist they hired. Gerald Patterson could go to jail. Harold smiled for the first time in days. So we call their bluff. Exactly. We send them a letter demanding they stop construction immediately. We include copies of the original deed and Tom's survey. We give them 7 days to respond. And if they don't respond? Emily's smile got wider. Then we bring in the bulldozer. Harold laughed. It was a good laugh. The kind he hadn't had since Betty was alive. Let's do it, he said. They worked together all weekend, preparing the letter. Emily made sure every word was legally correct. Harold added copies of all his evidence. The old deed, Tom's survey, the photographs. On Monday morning, Harold drove to the post office and sent the letter by certified mail. He watched the clerk stamp it and put it in the outgoing bin. Special delivery for Gerald Patterson, Harold muttered to himself. Now all he had to do was wait. The week that followed was the longest of Harold's life. Every morning, he walked to the edge of his property and looked at the construction site. The workers were still there, pouring concrete and laying bricks. They didn't know that everything was about to change. On day 3, Harold got a phone call. He didn't recognize the number. Mr. Mitchell? This is Richard Crane, from the HOA legal department. Harold's grip tightened on the phone. I got nothing to say to you. Mr. Mitchell, please. I'm calling about your letter. There seems to be some confusion. No confusion, Harold said. That's my land. You're building on it illegally. You have 4 more days to stop, Mr. Mitchell. Our records clearly show. Your records are forged, Harold interrupted. I have proof. And if you don't stop construction, I will remove it myself. There was a long pause. When Richard spoke again, his voice had lost its smoothness. Mr. Mitchell, I strongly advise you not to do anything rash. The HOA will protect its property. It's not your property, Harold said. Never was, never will be. He hung up the phone. On day 5, a black SUV pulled up to Harold's house. 2 men in suits got out. They weren't smiling. Harold met them on the porch. Can I help you, gentlemen? One of the men handed Harold an envelope. You've been served, Mr. Mitchell. The HOA is seeking an injunction to prevent you from interfering with construction. Harold took the envelope calmly. Thank you for delivering this. The men looked surprised by his reaction. They had expected him to be scared. But Harold wasn't scared. He was ready. After they left, Harold called Emily. They're trying to get a judge to stop me, he said. I expected this, Emily replied. Don't worry, Grandpa. The hearing won't be until next week at the earliest. That gives us time. Time for what? Time to act. The injunction isn't in effect yet. Legally, you still have every right to remove construction from your property. Harold understood. The clock was ticking. If he was going to do this, he had to do it now. Day 7 arrived. The deadline had passed. The HOA had not stopped construction. Harold woke up before dawn. He put on his work clothes and his old boots. He ate a good breakfast because he knew he would need his strength. Then he made a phone call. Charlie? It's Harold Mitchell. I need to rent a bulldozer. Today. Yes, I know how to drive one. I worked construction for 5 summers when I was young. Can you deliver it by noon? Charlie said he could. Harold hung up the phone and walked outside. The sun was just coming up, painting the sky orange and pink. Today's the day, Betty, he said softly. Today I keep my promise. At 11:45, a flatbed truck pulled up to Harold's property. On the back was a big yellow bulldozer. Charlie helped Harold get it unloaded. You sure about this? Charlie asked, looking worried. Never been more sure of anything in my life, Harold replied. He climbed into the bulldozer's seat. The controls felt familiar in his hands, even after all these years. Some things you never forget. Harold started the engine. It roared to life, loud and powerful. He looked toward the construction site. Workers were taking their lunch break. Gerald Patterson's black car was parked nearby. Perfect timing. Harold put the bulldozer in gear and started moving forward. The moment had finally come. The bulldozer rumbled across Harold's property like a yellow beast awakened from a long sleep. The ground shook beneath its heavy tracks. Birds flew away from the trees, startled by the noise. Harold's heart was pounding, but his hands were steady. He had waited a week for this moment. He had given them every chance to do the right thing. They had chosen to ignore him. Now they would learn that Harold Mitchell was not a man to be ignored. The construction workers saw him coming first. They were sitting on stacks of lumber, eating their sandwiches. One of them pointed and shouted. Others jumped to their feet. Hey, what are you doing? Harold didn't answer. He kept the bulldozer moving forward, straight toward the half-built recreation center. Gerald Patterson came running out of a temporary office trailer. His face was red, his tie was loose. He waved his arms frantically. Stop! Stop right there! Harold looked down at Gerald from the bulldozer seat. Their eyes met. Harold saw fear in Gerald's eyes. Real fear. Good. You had 7 days. Harold shouted over the engine noise. Time's up. He pushed the lever forward. The bulldozer's blade hit the first wall with a tremendous crash. Concrete blocks tumbled down like children's toys. Dust exploded into the air. Workers scattered in every direction, screaming. Gerald was on his phone, screaming even louder. "Police! Send the police! There's a madman destroying our building!" Harold didn't care. He pushed forward again. Another wall fell, then another. The feeling was incredible. All his anger, all his grief, all his frustration. It was pouring out through the machine. Every wall that fell was justice. Every brick that crumbled was revenge for Betty's roses. A section of the roof collapsed with a thunderous boom. Harold backed up and hit it again. More destruction. More dust. More chaos. He looked down and saw something in the rubble. A flash of pink. He stopped the bulldozer and climbed down, his old knees protesting. There, among the broken bricks, was a single rose, one of Betty's roses. It had survived somehow, growing up through the construction debris. Harold picked it up gently. It was beautiful and perfect, just like Betty had been. "I found one," he whispered. "I found one of your flowers." Tears ran down his dusty cheeks. But they were happy tears now. The sound of sirens broke through his thoughts. 3 police cars came racing down the road, lights flashing. They screeched to a stop, near the destruction. Officers jumped out with their hands on their weapons. "Sir, step away from the vehicle. Put your hands up." Harold placed the rose carefully in his shirt pocket. Then he raised his hands slowly. "I'm unarmed," he called out. "Just an old man." One officer approached carefully. He was young, maybe 25. His name tag said Officer Martinez. "Sir, what's going on here? Did you do all this?" "I did," Harold said calmly. "And I had every right to do it." Gerald Patterson pushed through the crowd of workers. "Arrest him. He destroyed our property. He's insane." Officer Martinez looked confused. "Sir, please calm down. We need to understand what happened." Harold reached slowly into his back pocket. "May I show you something, officer?" Martinez nodded carefully. Slowly, Harold pulled out a folded piece of paper. It was a copy of his grandfather's deed, with Tom's survey notes attached. "This land belongs to me," Harold explained. "It has belonged to my family for 100 years. The HOA built on my property, without permission. I gave them legal notice to stop. They refused. So I removed their construction, as is my right under state law." Martinez took the papers and studied them. His eyebrows went up. "He's lying," Gerald shouted. "We bought that land. We have documents." "Your documents are forged," Harold said quietly. "I can prove it." More cars were arriving now. A news van pulled up. A reporter jumped out with a cameraman right behind her. "We're getting reports of a confrontation at the Maplewood Estates construction site," the reporter was saying into her microphone. "It appears that an elderly resident has demolished part of a new recreation center." The cameraman pointed his lens at Harold, at the destroyed building, at Gerald's furious face. This was becoming a very big deal. Officer Martinez made a decision. "Everyone needs to calm down. Mr. Mitchell, Mr. Patterson, we're going to sort this out at the station. Nobody is being arrested yet, but we need statements from everyone." Harold nodded. He expected this. Emily had prepared him for it. "I'll cooperate fully," Harold said. "I have nothing to hide." Gerald looked like he wanted to explode. "This is outrageous. I want him charged with destruction of property, trespassing, reckless endangerment." "Sir, please lower your voice," Martinez said firmly. "We'll investigate everything." At the police station, Harold was placed in a small interview room. It wasn't a cell, just a room with a table and chairs. Officer Martinez brought him a cup of coffee. "Your granddaughter is on her way," Martinez said. "She said not to say anything until she gets here." Harold nodded. "Smart girl." Emily arrived 20 minutes later, slightly out of breath. She was carrying a large folder stuffed with papers. "Grandpa, are you okay?" "I'm fine, sweetheart." "Better than fine, actually." Emily sat down next to him. She spread her papers on the table just as a detective entered the room. He was an older man with gray hair and tired eyes. His name was Detective Williams. "Mr. Mitchell, I've heard some interesting things about you today," Williams said, sitting down across from them. "Want to tell me your side of the story?" Emily spoke first. "Detective, my grandfather acted within his legal rights. I have documentation here that proves the HOA committed fraud to steal his property." She laid out everything. The original deed, Tom's survey, the county records showing the forged signature, the old letter proving Gerald Patterson's 30-year grudge. Williams studied each document carefully. His expression changed from skepticism, to surprise, to something like respect. "This is quite a case you've built here," he said finally. "If what you're saying is true, the HOA is in serious trouble." "It's all true," Harold said. "Every word." Williams leaned back in his chair. "Here's the situation. The HOA is demanding we charge you with multiple crimes. But based on what I'm seeing, you may have had legal justification for your actions. Emily jumped in. Detective, we're prepared to file countercharges, fraud, forgery, theft of property, elder abuse. Williams raised an eyebrow. Elder abuse? They deliberately targeted a sick, elderly man, Emily explained. They sent someone to his house when he was ill with the flu, knowing he would be confused and easy to trick. That's elder abuse under state law. Williams nodded slowly. I need to make some calls. Sit tight. He left the room. Harold and Emily looked at each other. You did good, Grandpa, Emily said softly. We're not done yet, Harold replied. An hour passed. Then 2. Harold was getting tired. It had been a long, exhausting day. But he refused to complain. Finally, the door opened. Detective Williams came back. But he wasn't alone. A woman in a business suit followed him. She had sharp eyes and a serious expression. Mr. Mitchell, this is District Attorney Catherine Chen, Williams said. She'd like to speak with you. Catherine Chen sat down and looked at Harold for a long moment. Mr. Mitchell, I've reviewed the evidence your granddaughter provided. I've also spoken with the county recorder's office and verified several of your claims. Harold waited, his heart beating faster. Based on my review, I don't believe any charges against you are appropriate. You appear to have acted within your rights as a property owner. Harold let out a breath he didn't know he was holding. However, Chen continued. I am opening a criminal investigation into the Maplewood Estates HOA, specifically, into Gerald Patterson and Richard Crane. Emily squeezed Harold's hand. There's more, Chen said. In cases like this, where fraud has been used to steal property, the victim is often entitled to significant compensation. I'd recommend you consult with a civil attorney about pursuing damages. Harold was almost afraid to ask. Damages? For the emotional distress, for the destruction of your garden, for the years of harassment, and for the value of any construction the HOA completed on your property. She paused. Which now legally belongs to you. Harold blinked. The construction belongs to me? What's left of it? Chen said with a slight smile. Anything they built on your land is technically your property. You had every right to demolish it. But whatever materials remain, whatever foundations were poured, it's all yours. Emily's eyes went wide. Grandpa, do you realize what this means? Harold was starting to understand. The HOA had spent hundreds of thousands of dollars on that construction. They had poured foundations. They had laid pipes and electrical lines. They had built walls and partial structures, all on his land, all his now. That night, Harold went home a free man. No charges, no arrest, just an old man who had stood up for what was right. But the story wasn't over. Not by a long shot. The next morning, Harold woke up to find 3 news vans parked outside his house. Reporters were knocking on his door. His phone was ringing off the hook. The story had gone viral. Elderly man brings bulldozer to fight HOA, was the headline on every news website. Videos of Harold and the bulldozer were everywhere. People were calling him a hero. Harold didn't want to be famous. He just wanted to drink his coffee and watch the sunrise. But he understood that this attention might help his case. Emily handled the reporters. She gave interviews explaining what the HOA had done. She showed them the evidence of fraud. She told the story of Betty's garden. Public opinion turned against the HOA like a tidal wave. People from all over the country sent messages of support. Some sent money. Others shared their own horror stories about terrible HOAs. Gerald Patterson went into hiding. His fancy house in Maplewood Estates had angry protesters outside. His picture was all over the news, labeled as a fraudster and a bully. A week after the bulldozer incident, something surprising happened. A black car pulled up to Harold's house. Harold recognized it as the same type of car Richard Crane had driven. His guard went up immediately, but the man who got out wasn't Richard Crane. He was older, with silver hair and an expensive suit. He walked up to Harold's porch alone. No briefcase, no papers. Mr. Mitchell? My name is David Chen. I'm the chairman of the board for Maplewood Estates. May I speak with you? Harold studied the man. He didn't seem aggressive or threatening. He seemed tired, maybe even ashamed. Say your piece, Harold said. David Chen sighed. Mr. Mitchell, I want to apologize. On behalf of the entire HOA board, I am deeply sorry for what happened to you. Harold said nothing. He waited. Most of us on the board had no idea what Gerald was doing. We trusted him to handle the recreation center project. We didn't know about the forged documents or the moved property markers. When the truth came out, we were horrified. Gerald was your president, Harold said. You chose him. You're right. And that was our mistake. But I'm here to make things right. David pulled an envelope from his jacket pocket. This is an offer of settlement. The HOA wants to compensate you for everything you've been through. Harold didn't take the envelope. How much? $300,000. Plus, we'll pay to restore your wife's garden. We'll hire the best landscapers, buy the same types of roses, rebuild the bench. Whatever you want. Harold was stunned. $300,000 was more money than he had ever seen in his life, but something bothered him. What about Gerald? And Richard Crane? David's expression darkened. They've both been removed from their positions. Gerald is facing criminal charges for fraud and forgery. Richard Crane has been disbarred and is also facing charges. They will be held accountable. Harold thought about this for a long moment. He thought about Betty, about his grandfather, about what they would want him to do. I need to talk to my granddaughter, Harold said finally. I'll give you an answer tomorrow. David nodded. Take all the time you need. And Mr. Mitchell? For what it's worth, I think you're a brave man. What you did took incredible courage. Harold watched him drive away. Then he went inside and called Emily. They talked for hours. Emily was cautious about the settlement offer. She thought they could get more if they went to court. The evidence of fraud was overwhelming. A jury would almost certainly side with Harold, but Harold wasn't sure he wanted to fight anymore. He was 72 years old. Court cases could drag on for years. He might not live to see the end of it, and the money wasn't really the point. It never had been. What do you want, Grandpa? Emily asked finally. Forget about the money. Forget about revenge. What would make you happy? Harold was quiet for a long time. Then he said, I want Betty's garden back. I want to sit on our bench and talk to her like I used to. I want to grow old in peace, without anyone trying to take my home. Then that's what we'll ask for, Emily said. The money, the garden, and a guarantee that they'll never bother you again. The next morning, Harold called David Chen. He accepted the settlement with a few conditions. The money would be $300,000, as offered. The garden would be restored exactly as it was, supervised by Harold himself. And the HOA would sign a legally binding agreement to never contact Harold again, never try to buy his property, and never build within 500 feet of his land. David Chen agreed to everything. 1 month later, Harold stood in his restored garden. New roses were blooming. A beautiful wooden bench sat in the center, with a brass plaque that read, In loving memory of Betty Mitchell. Harold sat down on the bench. The morning sun was warm on his face. Birds sang in the trees. Everything was peaceful. I did it, Betty, he said softly. I kept my promise. He reached into his pocket and pulled out the single rose he had found in the rubble. He had pressed it and preserved it. It was dry now, but still beautiful. He placed it gently on the bench beside him. In the distance, Harold could hear the sounds of the neighborhood. Cars driving, children playing, normal life going on. But something was different now. The people of Maplewood Estates looked at Harold differently. They waved when they drove by. They stopped to chat when they saw him in his garden. They brought him cookies and casseroles and homemade bread. He wasn't just the strange old man in the little white house anymore. He was Harold Mitchell, the man who stood up to the bullies and won. Emily came to visit every weekend now. She was graduating from law school in the spring, and she had already been offered jobs at 3 different firms. They all wanted the young woman who had helped take down a corrupt HOA. I couldn't have done it without you, Harold told her one Sunday afternoon. Emily smiled. You're the one who drove the bulldozer, Grandpa. I just handled the paperwork. Harold laughed. It was a good laugh, full of joy and peace. Life wasn't perfect. Harold still missed Betty every single day. His knees still ached when it rained. He still got lonely sometimes in the quiet evenings, but he had won. He had protected his home. He had honored his wife's memory, and he had proved that one person, even an old person, could stand up against injustice and make a difference. The settlement check for $300,000 sat in Harold's bank account. He didn't need much money at his age, so he did something that would have made Betty proud. He started a scholarship fund, the Betty Mitchell Scholarship for students who wanted to study law and help regular people fight against corruption and fraud. Every year, a young person would get money for law school. Every year, Harold would meet them and tell them Betty's story. Use your knowledge to help people, he would say. That's what the law is for. Not to help the rich get richer. Not to let bullies win. But to protect the little guy. The first scholarship went to a young woman named Maria. She was the first person in her family to go to college. She reminded Harold of Emily, smart, determined, and full of fire. When Maria graduated and passed the bar exam, she sent Harold a letter. She was going to work for a legal aid organization, helping elderly people who couldn't afford lawyers. Harold read that letter 100 times. He kept it in his desk drawer, right next to the pressed rose and his wedding photo. Some nights, Harold would sit on Betty's bench and look up at the stars. He would think about his grandfather, who had worked so hard to buy this land. He would think about his father, who had kept it safe through the Depression and 2 world wars. He would think about Betty, who had filled it with flowers and love and laughter, and he would think about the future. About Emily and Maria and all the young people who would carry on the fight for justice. The bulldozer was long gone, returned to Charlie's rental yard. The destroyed recreation center had been cleared away. The orange construction fence had been replaced by a beautiful wooden fence that Harold had built himself. But the legend lived on. People in Maplewood still talked about the day Harold Mitchell climbed onto a bulldozer and taught the HOA a lesson they would never forget. Years later, when Harold was 80 years old, a reporter came to interview him for the 10th anniversary of the bulldozer incident. "Mr. Mitchell," the reporter asked, "what advice would you give to people who are facing injustice?" Harold thought carefully before answering. "Stand up for what's right," he said. "Even when you're scared, even when you're old, even when everyone tells you that you can't win. Because sometimes, just sometimes, the little guy does win, and when that happens, it changes everything." He paused and looked out at Betty's garden, blooming in the sunshine. "And be kind," he added. "Be kind to everyone you meet, because you never know what battles they're fighting. You never know what they've lost. Kindness costs nothing, but it means everything." The reporter thanked him and left. Harold went back to his garden, back to his bench, back to his peaceful life. He had won 6 figures. But more importantly, he had won something that money couldn't buy. He had won his dignity, his home, his peace, and that was worth more than all the bulldozers in the world.